Well,
Oh, these.
here we go. Judges chapter 11, and I've entitled this, Get the Facts Straight. Get the Facts Straight. So let's take a look at our outline, and let's take a look at Jephthah's entrance into the world. Verse 1 of chapter 11 says this, Now Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Now, Gilead is the father of Jephthah, as we just read, and he is only one of three men with the same name. And there is not much more that scriptures record or in biblical history about Jephthah's father. This is it at this particular verse. We must make two observations, though. We do know that he is the son of an illicit union between Gilead and a harlot. And the harlot is nameless. We don't know what her name is. And we have seen this with Gideon, who had 70 sons, and yet he felt compelled by the lust of his flesh to have another son with a concubine, and that boy's name was Abimelech. We've looked at him before. But also notice in the text that the scriptures record he is a valiant warrior. The Hebrew carries the idea of bravery and strength. Now, we don't have any record of his involvement in previous military campaigns. Now, this is where you have to dig a little bit. However, Gilead is likely in the inheritance of Manasseh, from which Gideon delivered them from the Midianites. He might have even fought with Gideon after the initial midnight campaign. And if you turn back to chapter 7, verse 23, we read that Gideon is going around, and in verse 23, the men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. Now, the scripture does not specifically say that Jephthah joined Gideon and fought against the Midianites. I think it is reasonable to connect the dots that he is, or he has done that. Now, let's take a look at his home life. Verse 2. Gideon's wife bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. Now, children, especially sons born from a concubine, were often driven out by the biological siblings for fear of having their share of the inheritance reduced. Now, we read about another judge who fathered a son from a concubine, Gideon, and his name was Abimelech. And that is the only similarity between Jephthah and Abimelech. Because if you remember, Abimelech implied that Gideon's 70 sons wanted to be judges, which was a fearful fabrication of his own mind. Here, Jephthah's foster brothers openly drive him out of the area. Now, in verses 2 and 3, he's noted as a mighty warrior, a man of valor. Verse 3, so Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows gathered themselves about Jephthah, and they went out with him. It came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel. So what in the world is going on in these verses? First of all, if you take a look at a map, Tob or Tob, depends on how you want to pronounce it, is a geographical area, not a specific city. It was not far from Gilead, and it was mostly desert. And the scriptures tell us that an unknown number of worthless fellows joined Jephthah. It says they went out with him. So, what does that mean? Because of the presence of Ammon, Jephthah and these men were making raids on the Ammonites, like what David did when he was a refugee from King Saul. Worthless means less desirable. Society's unsavory because they were out of place. So this tells you a little bit about the city of Gilead. It was a very rich city. It was occupied by powerful sheiks, men of nobility dressed in fine clothes. This is an additional reason why Jephthah was driven away. He did not fit in. Now, let me ask you a question. Is it possible that because of Jephthah's previous military prowess and a developing reputation of making raids on the Ammonites, he suddenly becomes useful? If you take a look at verses 4 to 8 with me, we see that's exactly how these snooty men from Gilead viewed him. Verse 4, it came about after a while that the sons of Ammon fought against Israel. Now, we knew this battle was coming. If you go back to chapter 10, verse 17, it says, Then the sons of Ammon were summoned, and they camped in Gilead. And the sons of Israel gathered together and camped in Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, Who is the man who would begin to fight against the sons of Ammon? He shall become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Now remember, one of the literary styles of the Hebrew language and writing is that many times they give you a summary of what is about to take place. That's what you have here in verses 17 and 18. This is a summary of a battle that will be given more detail, and that's what we find here in verse 4. Verse 5 says, When the sons of Ammon fought against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, Come and be our chief, that we might fight against the sons of Ammon. Then Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, Did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? So why have you come to me now, when you are in trouble? The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, For this reason we have now returned to you, that you may go out with us and fight with the sons of Ammon, and become head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Now let's make some observation and comments here. Now this battle between Israel and Ammon had been simmering for some time, as I mentioned in chapter 10, verse 17 and 18. Well, in verse 5, the battle has begun, and the powerful leaders of Gilead were unable to find someone to lead them into battle. This problem has been troubling them when they saw Ammon gathered together for war, chapter 10, verse 18. Evidently, there is a lull in the skirmish. The battle has begun, but there's a lull. And they send a delegation to find Jephthah in Tob. They know he is somewhere in that region, and their diligent search, they locate him. Now, I wonder what that initial meeting was like. Did these leaders come humbly? There's no mention of sorrow for how they treated Jephthah. They knew how Gilead's sons treated him, and I wonder if Jephthah himself was skeptical. You can almost hear it in the words that he says. He certainly lets his feelings and perspective be known, doesn't he? Are these leaders dangling a carrot before Jephthah? Jephthah calls it like it is. He asks two pointed questions. Number one, don't you remember that you had such hatred for me, you drove me from my father's house? The Hebrew for drive me out means to expel, to cast out, to evict, to toss out. So that tells you the perspective of Gilead's sons towards Jephthah. And this raises another question that the scriptures do not answer. Why weren't the sons of Gilead willing to lead these men into war? The second question, if I had not valued, this is Jephthah, if I had no value to you, why are you coming to me when you are in trouble? I think implied in that question is, you really can't find a man in all of Gilead to act as your leaders and lead you into battle, can you? Not even one of my brothers. I want you to notice in verse 8, they do not answer either one of Jephthah's questions. Instead, they reply, for this reason. What reason? We are broken over what has happened to you? No. We are wrong? No. We have sinned against you? No. We have returned to you because no one else is willing to step up and we need you to deliver us. You have established yourself as a valiant, brave, courageous warrior. There is no one like you in Gilead. That's why we're coming to you and asking you to lead us into battle. And you know what? We'll even sweeten the pot. And if you agree to come, and if there's victory, we will make you ruler over us. Now look at verses 9 through 11 with me. So Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, if you take me back to fight against the sons of Ammon, and the Lord gives them up to me, will I become your head? So he's trying to get them to fully commit to this carrot that they're dangling in front of him. And the elders, verse 10 of Gilead, said to Jephthah, the Lord is witness between us. Surely we will do as you have said. Now, wait a minute. Jephthah didn't say this. Jephthah didn't come up with this proposal. Jephthah didn't go seek them out like Abimelech did. They came to him. Notice the twist that is taking place. In verse 11, then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and chief over them, and Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. Now, this is very, very intriguing here. Let's kind of pull this apart. Jephthah is being very cautious and wise. His unfortunate experience with these deceitful leaders results in acting shrewdly. Now, that is not a bad thing. Jesus tells a parable of servants who had been dipping into the master's funds, and they were called into accountability, and one slave was unable to collect the full debt, and he said, well, pay me half of it, we'll call it even. And Jesus complimented him for being shrewd. Now, he lays out two conditions. Jephthah lays out two conditions. Number one, if the Lord blesses in a military victory, he wants the Lord's hand involved in this battle. They desperately need the Lord to step in again, similar to what the Lord did for Gideon in Manasseh with the Midianites. And second of all, you indeed take me back, return me to my home, and reinstate me, and all that I lost will be returned. In other words, if you are going to fulfill your promise, and God fulfills his promise of giving me the victory, then you will not secretly bring me back into town and give me a little cottage on the end of town and continue to isolate me. I will live among the inhabitants, even though I don't look like them, I might not act like them, I might not speak like them, I might not sound like them. You will reestablish me like I should have been before you drove me out. Excuse me, I think that's important. Now, notice that the leaders make a vow calling on the Lord to be witness to what they are pledging. Now, this is serious here. What they are saying is that the Lord is hearing every word they are saying. Hence, if a dispute arises, regardless of human witnesses that can be bribed, the God of truth will settle the matter. Now, pause for a moment and think along with me. If we call God as our witness, and this was done 2 other times in the book of Joshua, chapter 22, verse 28, and chapter 22, verse 34. This is the new generation that came into the land, the second generation. They had been through the battle. Joshua is about to die. He gathers the people together and he warns them about their allegiance to the Lord and warns them of the consequences if they become disloyal. And they pledge, the Lord is our witness, we will serve God. And you are no further into the book of Judges until chapter 2, when it is stated there that they did not drive out the inhabitants of the land and they turned to worship idols. Now, when you call the Lord as your witness, he will remain true to the vow that you made. Now, how do we know this? Because if you take a look at the book of Judges like we have been doing, that generation called on God to be their witness, that they would be faithful, they would be loyal, right? And they weren't. God is the witness, and what does he do? He starts delivering the tribes into captivity for punishment and discipline. God has creative ways to validate the truth. If you call him as a witness and then you try to renege on your vow. The Bible is very, very clear about making vows. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Now, I'm going to go one step further here. And here's where I'll probably get into trouble, but I've been there before. When a couple makes a vow before God, they're literally calling God as their witness in the vow that they pledge to love and cherish and honor till death do them part, but they break the vow. It would be an interesting study to examine the life of the person who breaks the vow and the various ways that God is disciplining them for breaking the vow. And I think it's very, very clear, and it's sad to see this in our culture. It is more sad to see it in the church. These leaders were calling on God to be their witness. As I said, this was previously done in Joshua 22, verse 28 and verse 34. Now, Jephthah is trusting the Lord to bring about the fulfillment of these men's pledge. He is not trusting the leaders of Gilead. He has been disappointed in them before. Now, he returns with them and is made chief over them and, quote, spoke all of his words before the Lord. This is another important historical record of what's going on. when you read these things, you should pause and say, what does that mean? Now, most commentators believe that during this ceremony, this was a very prestigious ceremony of making Jephthah ruler over Gilead. During this ceremony, that the commitment the leaders made and what Jephthah committed to do were rehearsed for the hearing of the people. Did you get that? It was done publicly. Similar to a wedding, is it not? Where a couple stands there, first of all, before God, second of all, before the preacher, and third, before their friends and family members. And they vow to love, honor, cherish, and obey till death do us part. That's what's going on here by one commentator's understanding. It was a public rehearsal. So they were putting themselves under the authority, if you please, of God and the people. Another commentator thinks that the high priest might have been present. Others go one step further, indicating that the ceremony was performed in front of the tabernacle, which, by the way, is at Shiloh, or that the ark was present. Now, I don't think they're transporting the ark around. Of course, this is pre-Eli, but possibility. All I want us to walk away with is this is a solemn ceremony. No other judge or ruler experienced a ceremony such as this that we have studied or that we will study in the weeks coming. Now, in verses 12 to 28, Jephthah schools the king of Ammon. So permit me to read these verses and see if you can piece in what Jephthah is talking about in the life of Israel. Beginning in verse 12. So he's crowned as ruler over Gilead, and he sends a message to Ammon. And he wants to find out what is the real issue. Now, Jephthah, verse 12, sent messengers to the king of the sons of Ammon and said, what is between you and me, that you have come to me to fight against my land? The king of the sons of Ammon said to the messengers of Jephthah, here's the reason, because Israel took away my land when they came up from Egypt, from the Aran as far as the Jabbok and the Jordan. Now, therefore, return them peaceably. But Jephthah sent messengers again to the king of the sons of Ammon, and they said to him, oh, time out. Israel did not take away the land of Moab, nor the land of the sons of Ammon. For when they came up from Egypt, and Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh, then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. And they also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they went through the wilderness around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and came to the east side of the land of Moab, and they camped beyond the Aran. And they did not enter the territory of Moab, for Arnon was on the border of Moab. And Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Ammonites, and king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, please let us pass through your land to our place. But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all of his people and camped in Jahaz and fought with Israel. And the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all of his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel possessed all the land of the Amorites and the inhabitants of that country. So they possessed all the territory of the Amorites, from the land of Arnon as far as Jabbok, and from the wilderness as far as the Jordan. Since the Lord, the God of Israel, drove out the Amorites from before his people Israel, are you then to possess it? Do you not possess what Chemosh, your God gives you to possess. So whatever the Lord our God has driven out before us, we will possess. Now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab? Did he even strive with Israel, or did he even fight against them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and all the cities that are in the banks of the Arnon, 300 years, why did you not recover them during that time? I therefore have not sinned against you, but you are doing me wrong by making war against me. May the Lord, the judge today between the sons of Israel and the sons of Ammon. But the king of the sons of Ammon disregarded the message which Jephthah sent to him. Now let me make some observations for us, okay? Jephthah makes inquiry to the king of Ammon, what is the dispute between Israel and the Ammonites that may lead to war? What exactly is the issue? The king of Ammon states that Israel invaded an area of their land belonging to them and seized it. Now, if Jephthah returns the land, the matter will end peaceably. Though not specifically stated, the inference is if it is not returned, the king of Ammon is prepared to recapture it. Then in verses 14 to 27, Jephthah recounts the historical events in question. Now, I want you to observe this very carefully. The events called in question occurred 400 years earlier. 400 years earlier. In verse 26, Jephthah wonders why the Ammonites did not recapture the land in question, seeing that Israel occupied that area for 300 years. Now, when Moses was leading the people to the promised land, upon approaching each new area occupied by foreign forces, he sent messengers to inquire if they would be granted safe passage. Moses also pledged that the people would not drink from their wells, plunder their fields, but remain on the main road. In each case, they were denied, and in some cases, they were even attacked. Jephthah states the obvious. Whatever land Shemash, remember that's their pagan god, gave the Ammonites, it was theirs to possess. Moreover, land God gave to Israel would be rightfully theirs because Jehovah defeated their pagan god. Jephthah summarizes the situation, declaring that the king of Ammon was sinning against Israel and that Jehovah would judge between them. The king dismisses this. He discards Jephthah's speech and he prepares for war, and we'll look at that next week. Well, let's take a look at some walkaways, okay? Every conception and birth can become part of God's divine purpose and program. You cannot cop out as a believer that you didn't have the best family life. You weren't raised in a Christian home. You had a difficult time. You barely made it through high school. You were a dropout. Forget the excuses. God was behind all of that, allowing it to happen. That was not his best. A lot of times when he allows these things to happen, it's because of our choices, and it's called consequences. But every conception and birth, first of all, Psalm 139, is from God himself, and it's part of a divine purpose and program. I stop and think about my life. I should have been dead several times. I should have been married and divorced at least twice. But God had a purpose for my life. He has woven me into his overall program. And when I share my life and what I went through, sometimes I'll get people saying, "Oh, you had a difficult life. Poor you." And they'll go on this little pity party thinking that they're helping me. And my usual response is this: whatever happened in my life, either by God's divine orchestration or his response to my sinful behavior, listen to me, becomes a platform for ministry. It becomes a soapbox to preach the faithfulness, the love, and the mercy and the grace of God. Your past cannot penalize you, cannot restrict you unless you choose so. One cannot read through the book of Hebrews chapter 11 and the hall of faith. And beloved, the only reason those men and women are in the hall of faith is just that, faith. That they have a spot-free life? Was their character exempt? No. Some of them had major flaws, like David, a first-degree murderer and an adulterer. But his birth and conception was part of a divine purpose and program. Second of all, regardless of others' prejudices, continue to faithfully serve the Lord. We see this with Jephthah. As I said, he might have been a part of Gideon's army with the Midianites. And when he was driven out, he continued to faithfully serve the Lord. He was not a Jonah who went out from the city and sat on a hill overlooking the city and waiting for some 37 days for God to judge the city, because the city was evangelized in 3 days. He walked the breadth and the length in 3 days. And God did not strike it like Jonah thought that he should. And there he sat on that hill for 37 days. And God even tried to change his heart by the gourd rising up, giving him shade, and then withering away. And God even says, you've got more cotton-picking sympathy for that gourd than you do for the people of Nineveh. He stopped faithfully serving the Lord. Well, Rick, what should he have done? He should have started discipling those people. But he didn't. Regardless of other people's prejudices, continue to faithfully serve the Lord. When I informed my bride that she was going to marry me, and then 2 days later I had to ask her, she reminded me, I didn't ask her, I told her one day, you're going to marry me. We were given 6 months. 6 months. It's not going to last any more than 6 months. Well, some 45, 46 years later, by God's grace, in spite of everybody's negativity, by his grace and mercy, we faithfully served the Lord. She faithfully discipled women, prayed with women, brought them along in the scriptures, regardless. Third, be diligent to have accurate facts so you can present them to the antagonist. This king of Ammon is an antagonist, and he's twisting the scripture. He's twisting history. He thinks that this event just happened a month ago. It was 400 years before. And even Jephthah, I believe, given a moment of wisdom by God, saying, look, we lived down there for 300 years. You never took it back then. What is the big deal now? If your God is so powerful, why didn't he give it back to you? Because our God put your God in place. Have accurate facts. Now listen to me, please. The longer a sinful situation continues, the more askewed, twisted the facts become, because they become so detached from the original offense, and they get propagated and they get exaggerated. That's why the Bible tells us, if your brother offends you or you offend your brother, go to your brother. Don't let the sun go down on a dispute. And then cultivate discernment when those who drove you out return for a favor. I've seen this happen, unfortunately, in counseling. Someone comes to me and they are so shattered. Someone has come to them wanting to work things out, and all they were doing was manipulating this person for their advantage. And when it is discovered, they are crushed. They did not have discernment when the person came to them. Let me give you an example. Marriage counseling. And both are at fault. And in marriage counseling, there is generally a heavier percentage placed on one partner than the other, but the sinful responses of the one partner to the over-offending spouse is just as bad, but here they come in for counseling. And we'll pick on the guy, because that's who's I usually start out afterwards, because he's not doing what he should be doing if he's a believer. I'll go after the guy. And as I'm talking with him, we see the worldly sorrow. Remember that series I did several weeks ago during the day? I see worldly sorrow. I see crocodile tears. I see fake news. I promise I won't do that again. I know I've hurt you terribly. I can't live without you. I'll do anything to get you back, and on and on and on and on. And it becomes psychological warfare on the spouse. What is she to believe? He seems genuine. She loses discernment because of her emotional bankruptcy. Instead of finding her account full and overflowing in her relationship with God, she tries to look for it in her spouse. And it's not going to happen, because the spouse is going to disappoint. The spouse is going to fail. What does this lady need? She needs to cultivate discernment. And in that particular scenario, what should she do? She should be asking some pointed questions. There should be collaboration between her and the counselor about a plan to put off and put on. And it's interesting, when I have attempted to do this, it generally has not gone well, because the offending spouse does not want that tight structure and discipline. And some of you have been involved in something like that with me, and it's been a total bust. And it wasn't our fault. We reached out, we tried everything that we could, but that person did not want that structure and that discipline. Serious offenses in the process of being restored should call in God to be a witness. I don't believe this is an Old Testament practice. I think this is something that could be done today. Like I said, in marriage, though it's not specifically stated, that's what's taking place. That's what's taking place. Infant dedications, where the pastor says, do you promise to raise this child in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord? And the couple says, yes, we do. They have just called God in as their witness. And though they can beguile other people, they cannot beguile God. So I think on serious offenses that are in the process of being restored, God should be called as witness. Because you know what? You can't bribe God. You cannot deceive God. You cannot trick God, because he sees the heart and he recognizes the motivation. Thoughts that you might have, questions, comments that you might have. One of the feedbacks that I received from you from the surveys, and thank you for all of you who did that. One person put it this way: at 80 years old, I can't keep up with you and take notes. I know I'm guilty of giving you too much. And maybe this is my hang up, that I feel like if I don't give you as much as God has given to me, I'm cheating you. So aren't you thankful that we are recording this, that you can go back and look at it at your leisure and pick up?
Yes, I am.
And pick up some stuff that you might have overlooked. You know what? In some cases, somebody said, you know, I really appreciate the more expanded notes. And I think, Ms. Davis, you may hit the comment about putting the notes up on the Zoom clipboard. We're not using Zoom. We're using GoToMeeting. And I don't know how I would even do that. I guess I would have to check that out. But if I give you expanded notes, and you'll see me reading my notes and my message to you, I feel, why should you tune in? Just read the notes. So I guess there's a little bit of deception on my part, a little bit of bait and switch. I'll put a little bit of a carrot out there and hope that you join in and participate. Any other thoughts or questions that you might have?
Well, I'm glad you recorded because I missed the first half. I was late.
That's okay. It is recorded. You go back. I got you marked down.
So I will go back.
Well, I got you marked down for
Definitely will go
attendance.
back.
So you're okay that way. Just go back and pick up on the notes. Yeah.
Oh, I will.
Okay.
But I got my paper here,
All right.
but I couldn't remember to bring it to you this morning.
Okay. Just bring it next time I see you, Sunday or whatever. Or maybe Saturday if we do the cleanup. And that's going to be weather permitting. Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts or comments or questions?
Nope.
Just an update information from those of you who are from the Wyalusing area. Many of you know Mikey. This was Penny's disabled brother. He was 50 years old. I first met him when I was first here, getting things arranged with Penny for flowers and plaques and stuff like that. And they shared custody care between Penny and another sister, 2 months on, in through there, back and forth. And that seemed to work out. He didn't need a lot of care, but he needed supervision. And so he had health difficulties, repeated kidney failure type situation. I got a call from Penny this morning that he was not doing well and that he had contracted COVID because there was COVID in the house between Penny and her husband. And so I was making arrangements to go out and meet with him and trust God to help me with the right words to say that were simple enough for him to understand and that he might be able to respond. In the process of preparing for that, Mikey has been called home. He passed away about no more than an hour after Penny and I talked. And it seems, according to Penny, that he was waiting for his sister to come. And I've seen that with people. They hang on until the person that they're looking for comes, is there, and then they release and they're able able to go. They're at peace. They've seen people, or they've sensed that they've been there. And I thought, if I had to preach Mikey's funeral, and I don't know, they're working out the details, how would I preach that? Mikey was disabled. He was mentally challenged. How would I preach that? I would preach it from the point of view that there was a special application of Christ's blood on Mikey's life because of his mental defect, the inability to fully grasp the salvation message. And I believe this is a biblical principle. David's illegitimate son went to heaven. He did not go to hell. And so I believe Mikey is in heaven. And I believe in a good conscience, if I were asked to do the service, I could say that with great clarity and then immediately move in. If Mikey was fully restored and brought back to you today, he would ask you, am I going to see you in heaven? Are you going to be there with me? So, sombering for us, death is an opportunity for us to rush in carefully, mercifully, but to not be afraid to speak about the resurrection and the life. Well, if there's no other questions, I need to go have my ice cream. I haven't even put it in the bowl so it can melt yet. But I think I can probably slobber it down. Tuesday, tomorrow we continue the new series on time from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Tuesday, parable of the hidden treasure. Thursday, we start the new class on ethics. That is going to be a fascinating study. Please don't be afraid of the word ethics. It's not going to be over your head. In fact, this is so vital, it very rarely gets good attention in Bible colleges or seminaries, let alone in the church. But if you stop and ask yourself, why do I do what I do? There's an ethic behind it. An ethic means a belief system. And so your ethics drives what you do and how you say what you say, etc. So I'm excited as I'm exploring this. I've never done a series on ethics before. I have never been exposed to a course on ethics. So we are going to learn together. We're going to learn together. Well, if there's no further ado, my vanilla fudge ripple is calling me. Can you hear it? Rick! Rick! Rick!
Rick wants company.
We are a sick group, okay? We are a sick group.
Life revolves around food, Rick. It's all about the food.
I tell you. Forget the faith, give me the food, right? You guys have a good night. Carl, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.